a time.
It's the fact.
One at a time.
It's the fact. It's the fact.
Smith for a secret under-the-table plot to have him canned from ESPN. Perkins is pulling back the curtain on a whole history of shady moves by Smith that could permanently shift your view of the network's top dog. Here is the full scoop. It all goes back to one massive turning point. There is a specific phone conversation that burned itself into Kendrick Perkins' memory forever. It was not some massive payday or an exciting career update, either. It was the moment he finally saw Stephen A. Smith's true colors once the studio cameras clicked off and the broadcast ended. See, what the general public completely misses is that Stephen A. Smith, the exact same guy sharing the first take desk with Perkins every single morning, flashing him grins, chuckling at his punchlines, and playing the role of a supportive buddy, was secretly scheming in the background to get Perkins kicked to the curb. The craziest thing? He came dangerously close to pulling it off. Had Perkins not stumbled into a chat with a top-tier ESPN boss, an impromptu exchange that was never on anyone's schedule, this entire secret would have stayed buried. Before we hit that climax, though, we have to look at the roots of this feud. Because this drama between Kendrick Perkins and Stephen A. Smith runs way deeper than two television analysts simply butting heads. This saga is centered on leverage. It is all about holding the reins. Most importantly, it highlights exactly what goes down when the absolute heaviest hitter in sports broadcasting decides another guy needs to lose his spot at the table. Let us take a trip back in time. Because these issues did not just pop up in 2026. The origins stretch back several years, right around the time Perkins was simply a retired NBA champ navigating his post-playing career. In 2019, he hopped on board with ESPN to break down hoops. Initially, everything was smooth sailing. Honestly, it was better than smooth. He came in totally driven and ready to grind. Every morning, he hit the studio with something to prove, wanting to show everyone he deserved a mic just as much as any other pro athlete who swapped jerseys for suits. However, a major roadblock stood in his way, and that roadblock was a specific person. You have to realize that when he first signed on, he definitely was not pulling in typical superstar broadcast money. He was locked into what they call a day rate gig. Basically, they were handing him around $2,500 every time he went on air, and they strictly limited his maximum monthly shifts. So even though huge audiences tuned in and saw him chilling at the first take desk, assuming he was a main staple of the program, the backstage truth was completely flipped. Management basically viewed him as a fill-in guy, dialing him up for emergencies, tossing him aside when things were fully staffed, and handing over checks that barely covered his travel hassles. Right here is where the plot thickens. This is also the exact moment Stephen A. Smith steps into the narrative in a totally unexpected way. Sometime during 2020 or early 2021, right as the Pro Hoops postseason was getting super intense, Smith already holding the crown as the network's undisputed top earner and main attraction, the absolute powerhouse whose takes shifted the entire industry, decided he wanted Perkins sitting next to him on First Take for a solid week straight. He was not asking for a couple of appearances. He wanted him Monday through Friday. But guess what the network brass said when Smith pitched that idea? They shut it down. They looked right at Stephen A., the exact same superstar destined for a $100 million mega deal, and informed him that Perkins simply was not allowed to work 5 consecutive days due to legal paperwork limits. That per-appearance setup had a hard ceiling, and the corporate suits at ESPN refused to flex their policies, not even for their number one talent. But Smith was not about to accept rejection. Perkins actually dropped this exact nugget on the Straight Game podcast himself, which is the main reason everyone assumed for years that Smith had his back. Because right after getting denied, Smith grabbed his phone, dialed up the big bosses, and basically ordered them to make it happen regardless. Per Perkins' own account, Smith later gave him a heads up that evening that completely altered his future. Smith straight up told him he would be getting a call from upper management the following day. As promised, within 24 hours, the network hit him with a jaw-dropping proposal. They bypassed merely extending his sporadic appearances. They did not just throw a handful of extra shifts on his plate. Instead, they ripped up his current agreement, which still had 12 months left, and slapped down a fresh 3-year contract valued right around $700,000 annually. In a literal flash, Kendrick Perkins leveled up from making a measly $2,500 per shift with zero job security to becoming a fully salaried staff member clearing nearly $750,000 annually. And guess who pulled those strings? None other than Stephen A. Smith. If you are just now catching up on this lore, your brain is probably jumping to the exact same conclusion everyone else's did back then. You are probably sitting there saying to yourself, well, on the surface, you'd think Stephen A. Smith was doing Kendrick Perkins a massive solid. It really seems like the ultimate case of a buddy having his friends back. It comes across as the network's biggest heavyweight using his clout to help someone out. Plus, for quite some time, Perkins totally bought into that narrative himself. However, there was a catch Perkins was completely unaware of back then. According to him, he eventually discovered that Stephen A. Smith had some pretty questionable ulterior motives. Based on everything the former big man has recently brought to light, helping him score a better deal had absolutely nothing to do with friendship. It was a calculated strategy, and Kendrick Perkins was merely a piece on the board. Just look at the timing. Back in 2020, Stephen A. Smith was busy hammering out the details of what turned out to be a historic payday with the network. He was setting himself up to be way more than just the main star of First Take. He was basically taking over as the unofficial boss behind the scenes. The goal was total authority over his co-hosts. He needed to dictate exactly who got to argue with him on live television, and specifically the manner in which those debates played out. Enter Kendrick Perkins. A massive, loud, occasionally raw former athlete guaranteed to draw views. To Smith, this guy was the ultimate opponent because he figured he could easily talk circles around him every single time. Stephen A. didn't secure that contract out of any concern for the Perkins family. He certainly didn't push for it because he viewed him as some broadcasting prodigy. The real reason was that tying the former center to a multi-year agreement guaranteed a reliable, highly manageable punching bag for his daily segments. He wanted a guy whose whole television run existed purely because Stephen A. Smith vouched for him. It was all about having a subordinate who, when the chips were down, would be forever indebted to the guy pulling the strings. For a long while, the dynamic worked flawlessly. The big man clocked in, threw down his hot takes, yelled a bit, and perfectly executed his assigned job. Meanwhile, Stephen A. occupied the spotlight, orchestrating the entire production like a director running his own personal theater. Then came the curveball nobody anticipated. Kendrick Perkins decided he was done following the script. Once he went off script, he began dismantling his boss's arguments with an intensity that crossed the line from entertainment into genuinely personal territory. Suddenly, Stephen A. wasn't hitting up upper management to get his coworker a raise anymore. He was making calls to try and have him removed, exposing some serious fractures in the First Take dynasty. If you want to grasp exactly why the network's biggest star ultimately flipped on his former project, you need to trace their on-air history over a span of several years. Their relationship didn't just explode overnight. It was a gradual, painful unraveling fueled by consecutive television blow-ups that went from lighthearted banter to incredibly toxic insults. Every single clash destroyed a little bit more of the mutual courtesy they originally shared. The turning point kicked off just like countless other sports media controversies, with a heated discussion regarding race. The scene was the First Take desk in February of 2023. The panel consisted of Kendrick Perkins, Stephen A. Smith, and J.J. Redick, the retired perimeter threat, who had successfully reinvented himself as a top-tier basketball pundit, and they were diving deep into the league's most valuable player debate. Right then, Perkins unleashed an opinion so incredibly radioactive it almost derailed the broadcast entirely. Here was his core premise. The MVP selection process suffered from systemic racial bias. He backed up his stance by throwing out statistics, noting that out of the MVP winners since 1980, whose teams finished outside the top 10, only 3 were white guys. Nikola Jokic snagged 2 of those, while Dirk Nowitzki grabbed the other, strongly implying this trend was definitely intentional. It was an insanely aggressive statement and completely polarizing. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, it's exactly the type of soundbite that gives network executives a heart attack while simultaneously making them jump for joy, knowing it's pure viral gold. The backlash was immediate, though it didn't come from the direction Perkins anticipated. It came directly from his desk mate, JJ Redick. Redick flat out refused to let that comment slide. He pushed back so hard that the resulting exchange went down as an absolutely legendary moment in First Take history. He called it out right there, stating that the sequence perfectly illustrated the program's biggest flaw, manufacturing fake storylines that have zero basis in the real world. That was merely the opening salvo from Redick. For him, this went way beyond a simple argument over numbers. He firmly believed his coworker was making a highly insulting accusation against a massive demographic, specifically the people casting the ballots, the journalists covering the sport, and the broader hoop culture as a whole. Redick zeroed in on the exact accusation. The notion that the media members responsible for voting were racist and actively showing bias toward white athletes. The atmosphere in the studio turned incredibly heavy. You could hear Redick's voice trembling, driven entirely by sheer anger rather than nerves. Give Perkins some credit, though. He refused to fold. He dug his heels in while the two went back and forth, trading rapid-fire accusations about what was actually said. Redick kept hammering his point home, aggressively telling Kendrick that he absolutely knew what kind of narrative he was trying to push. In the heat of the moment, Redick was so furious he accidentally referred to him as Spencer instead of his actual first name. When someone forgets their coworker's name on national television, you know the argument has crossed the line from a sports take into genuine animosity. With the pressure mounting, the former center reacted just like any old-school athlete. He came out swinging, insisting he wasn't calling anybody names, but just laying out the raw data. He doubled down on his numbers defense, making it crystal clear he wasn't going to let anyone silence him. The fallout from that clip was absolutely insane. Every corner of social media was ablaze, with Reddit forums practically melting down. But guess what Stephen A. Smith was doing while all this chaos unfolded? Multiple insiders claimed he just sat back completely silently, allowing Perkins and Redick to absolutely rip into one another. He literally just watched it happen like a guy sitting ringside at a heavyweight fight. Eventually, Smith did end up talking about the whole fiasco in public. During an appearance on the Bill Simmons podcast, he confessed that the situation spun wildly out of control and crossed into cringe territory. Quoting him directly, he stated that while debates can definitely cross the line, that specific broadcast completely jumped the shark. He felt both guys were partially out of line and admitted things got genuinely awkward. However, Perkins claims the most frustrating part of the whole ordeal wasn't even the argument itself. The tension on set didn't faze him one bit. After all, the guy has spent his whole life dealing with high-pressure environments. We are talking about someone who spent more than 10 years in the NBA and took home a ring with the Boston Celtics. He battled through brutal playoff series against the most intimidating guys in the world. Some shouting match on a daytime TV show was never going to shake him up. The real issue for Big Perk was the stuff that went down once the broadcast ended. According to him, Stephen A. never bothered to pull him aside post-show to offer any support or reassure him after the crazy segment. He didn't even get a courtesy phone call that evening. What Smith actually did was take that exact JJ Redick confrontation and use it against him in secret meetings. He allegedly pitched the narrative that Perkins was a total wildcard who posed a massive PR risk to the network anytime he went on live television. Apparently, this wasn't just a one-off situation where Smith took an on-screen dispute and weaponized it during private executive meetings. The arguments kept happening, and the exact same cycle repeated every single time. The two of them would butt heads on air, arguing over everything from the classic LeBron versus Jordan debate to the league's MVP race. They would even get into shouting matches over whether the East or the West was being unfairly overlooked. Yet the second the cameras cut, Smith would allegedly march straight to upper management to frame Perkins as a disruptive force. Look at the massive argument they had over the Christmas Day schedule back in August of 2025. The league had just dropped its holiday slate, and it was heavily loaded with teams from the West. 4 of the 5 matchups showcased Western Conference squads, leaving the Cleveland Cavaliers and New York Knicks as the lone Eastern representatives. Stephen A. immediately claimed this was a massive slap in the face to the Eastern Conference. Meanwhile, Perkins hopped onto the Road Trippin' podcast and completely tore Smith's logic apart. His stance was incredibly straightforward and heavily vocalized. He argued that the West simply hoarded all the massive superstars right now, dropping names like Anthony Edwards, Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, and even Cooper Flagg. He insisted the NBA was just making a brilliant financial move by showcasing its most famous faces on their biggest regular season day. This made total sense since they were going head-to-head with the NFL for Christmas Day ratings, and Big Perk absolutely did not hold back. He pointed out that the league is still ruled by its legendary veterans like KD, Steph, and LeBron, asking everyone to look at the opening night schedule. That first night featured those exact 3 guys alongside the defending champions getting their rings. And the Christmas lineup? Same story. He took the point even deeper, analyzing the league's competitive balance so thoroughly that it basically made Stephen A's take look incredibly superficial. He reminded everyone that fans have 2 major sports to choose from on Christmas, acknowledging that football obviously dominates the ratings. Everyone knows that, but the NBA is still fighting for viewership. To actually grab those fans, you have to find where all the massive basketball icons are currently playing. And right now, all those massive draws are playing out west. At first glance, this just looked like a standard television debate over a schedule drop. It's the typical talking head banter you see daily in the sports world. But if you ask Perkins, this was just one more instance of Smith taking an on-air disagreement and using it to sabotage him behind the scenes. Perk felt that Stephen A. absolutely hated being proven wrong on a public platform, particularly by a guy whose entire television career was essentially launched by a single phone call Smith had made a few years back. That sets the stage for arguably the most revealing moment of this whole feud. It all centered around one of Stephen A.'s classic, over-the-top monologues, except this time, he wasn't yelling about the game, a specific franchise, or a current athlete. He aimed it directly at Kendrick Perkins, and the footage instantly blew up online. Sitting at the first take desk looking genuinely heated, Smith just unleashed on Perk, and the whole vibe felt way more like a personal attack than a sports debate. He flat out stated that he didn't necessarily have a problem with Perkins' actual basketball points. Instead, he explicitly said that Perk was just getting on his nerves that day, and he wanted to explain exactly why. Catch what he just admitted right there? He openly confessed that the actual sports analysis wasn't the issue. He never once claimed that the facts were wrong. The entire complaint was just that he found the guy irritating. The conversation had clearly moved way past basketball. The beef had turned deeply personal. Smith's voice just kept getting louder with every word, hammering home that he was dealing with an actual NBA champion. You are bringing up Game 7, and he is bringing up Game 7. It is like, hey, Cat is just going to step up. Then Smith went straight for the throat. He pointed out the single moment from Perk's career that every basketball fan remembers, that exact injury that sidelined him for the most important matchup of his life. He understands this stuff because he actually has a championship ring. On top of that, when his team dropped Game 7, you were hurt and did not even take the court. That specific moment is where Perkins felt things went way too far. Bringing up his injury from the 2010 NBA Finals, that blown-out knee that stopped him from suiting up for Game 7 against the Lakers, a matchup Boston ended up losing, was a defeat that still eats at Perkins today. That was no longer sports analysis. It was not a debate. That was a direct attack, and Stephen A. Smith twisted the knife right on national TV. If you had played, you guys might have defeated the Lakers. That is a huge deal. It is just a game. The underlying message was obvious. Smith was basically telling him he had zero right to discuss Game 7 pressure, since he was not even on the floor during the biggest Game 7 of his own career. Even when Malika Andrews attempted to jump in and play peacemaker, asking if she could defend his honor, saying they did not have the time and that just shouting something does not magically make it a fact. The damage was already dealt. The internet got its viral clip, and the storyline was officially locked in. Behind closed doors, though, according to Perkins, Stephen A. Smith was taking these exact types of situations to convince the executives at ESPN that Kendrick was simply too much of a liability. However, that Charles Barkley drama from March of 2025 is probably the best proof of the double standard Perkins claimed was going on at the network. When Barkley hopped on TNT's Inside the NBA and called Perk both a fool and an idiot over his Lakers takes, Perkins shot right back on X with his usual fierce energy, daring Charles to come say those words directly to his face. At the time, Stephen A. Smith actually stood up for his guy in public, posting on X to tell Chuck to cut out the nonsense and start naming names. That sounds super supportive, right? It seems exactly like a coworker having your back. But Perkins claims off camera, things were completely different. While Smith was acting like a ride-or-die teammate for the world to see, Perkins alleged he was quietly telling ESPN management that the beef with Barkley proved exactly why he was a massive public relations nightmare. According to Perkins, the pitch was pretty straightforward. This dude sparks arguments wherever he ends up. Whether it is on our own shows, on random podcasts, across social media, or with talent from rival networks. How much time do we have until he turns into a massive headache? The most brutal irony in all of this is that by the time those two finally buried the hatchet in June of 2025, all thanks to Michael Wilbon stepping in to help them talk it out, with Barkley even offering to grab dinner together during the NBA Finals, the bridge at ESPN was already burned. The ideas Smith had planted in the minds of the higher-ups were fully growing, and Perkins was about to discover just how far down those roots stretched. Because there was still one more situation, one last highly publicized blow-up that, if you believe Perkins, handed Stephen A. the absolute last piece of ammo he was looking for. And it actually had zero connection to basketball. It's centered around a mobile game called Papaya Gaming. Back in November of 2025, reports say ESPN commanded all of their on-screen personalities, which included Perkins, to completely sever their relationships with the controversial app. The network stamped it as a conflict of interest and required everyone to fall in line. But here is the detail that truly made Perk furious. Stephen A. Smith had pushed that exact same app too. Yet, according to the reports, Smith did not face any kind of punishment. There was no public reprimand, nobody forcing him to drop the deal, absolutely nothing. Perkins says the takeaway could not possibly be more obvious. Stephen A. got to play by one set of rules, while the rest of the crew had a completely different rulebook. And for a guy like Kendrick, someone whose whole run at ESPN was kickstarted because Smith vouched for him, stepping a toe out of line meant putting his entire livelihood in jeopardy. The final showdown. By the time February of 2026 rolled around, the writing was clearly on the wall, and Perkins saw it all in plain English. Gossip had been flying around for weeks on end. YouTube videos, rocking crazy clickbait titles, were showing up all over the place, claiming the network had officially canned Perkins following a brand new screaming match with Stephen A. Smith. Troll accounts on X were pumping out fake breaking news tweets, perfectly copying the style of real insiders like Shams Charania and Adrian Wojnarowski to make the whole thing look legit. And over on Reddit, deep in the basketball threads and flooding the comment sections of literally every sports blog across the country, fans were arguing about whether Perk's run at ESPN had finally crashed and burned. The chatter was getting insanely loud, and for the very first time in his professional life, he felt the storyline slipping right out of his hands. But here is the main thing folks always seem to forget when it comes to Kendrick Perkins. This is a dude raised out in Beaumont, Texas, the 409, just like he calls it, where you get taught real young that you never back away from a scrap, you step right up to it. And that is exactly the move Perkins made. He took it straight to the airwaves, staring dead into the lens. He had this chill, unshakable vibe, the exact look of a guy who was totally cool with whatever went down next. Kendrick Perkins dropped a quote that completely shook up the whole sports broadcasting world. He straight up said that if the network fired him that day, he wouldn't lose a wink of sleep. His reason? Someone up in Boston would give him a job in a heartbeat. That clip blew up online practically instantly. But it wasn't just the quote itself that hit so heavy, it was the deeper meaning behind it. See, Perk wasn't just chatting about his employment status. He wasn't simply bragging about his ties to Boston, the town where he grabbed a ring and gets treated like absolute royalty. Nope. Perkins was delivering a warning, and that warning had exactly one target in mind: Stephen A. Smith. Translated from the unspoken language of cutthroat office politics, Perkins was basically laying this out. I don't belong to you. You really believe you made me? You think ringing me up back in 2020 means you get to call the shots on my time at this network? You've got it twisted. I had a name before we crossed paths, and I'll still have one long after you're gone. So if these executives show me the door, just because you were playing puppet master in the shadows, I'm strutting out of here with my chin up while my phone blows up with job offers. Man, the internet absolutely lost its mind over this. You had folks roasting him, while others gave him a standing ovation. Certain fans even tossed him into their mental pile of clueless basketball analysts who deserved a pink slip years back. However, there was one thing you could not argue against, whether you were a troll, a doubter, or even Stephen A. Smith himself. Perk just pulled off a move that pretty much zero people at the network have the guts to try. He kept it completely real. And the reality that he broke down over the next few days and weeks, it was a terrible look. Perkins didn't just drop one spicy soundbite and ghost everybody. He kept the conversation going on various pods and across his socials. Through different interviews, he slowly exposed what he called a toxic cycle of string pulling, playing favorites, and sneaky backstage tactics that supposedly made up Stephen A. Smith's entire playbook for staying on top at the company. The former center opened up about how Smith flexed his muscle to dictate exactly who got a seat at the first take desk, and even policed the takes they were allowed to give. He also claimed Smith would throw coworkers under the bus during closed-door meetings with the brass, all while acting like their biggest cheerleader on camera. Then he brought up the whole papaya gaming hypocrisy. He explained how he and other personalities had to cut off all business with the app, yet Smith got a total free pass for doing the exact same stuff. On top of that, he mentioned how that same deal Smith helped him ink back in 2020 wound up feeling way more like a choke chain than a career boost. Unsurprisingly, it was crickets over at headquarters. The network refused to drop a press release and completely dodged confirming or shooting down any of these accusations. They just sat back and let the media machine run, crossing their fingers that some new drama would bury this entire mess. But the one thing the suits couldn't manage was the internet's memory. Because the receipts highlighting this Smith and Perkins relationship were everywhere. You could find clues sprinkled throughout years of televised debates, tweets, and audio interviews. When you finally connect all those dots, matching up their public banter with the shady background moves Perk talked about, things start looking incredibly sketchy. Back in 2020, Smith assisted the big man in locking down a sweet $700,000 annual deal. Jump to 2023. Smith just watched as Perk and Jay Reddick almost went at it over a racial topic, only to later use that blowout as leverage behind closed doors. Then in 2025, Smith hopped on television to back up Perk during that beef with Charles Barkley, while supposedly trashing him as a total PR risk to upper management at the same time. Fast forward to February 2026, and the trap was already set. The blueprint Perk lays out here is incredibly predictable. You hype a guy up just enough so he needs you to survive. Then, the second they outlive their usefulness, start forming their own opinions, or dare to push back without your permission, you destroy them. But you don't do it in the spotlight, never where people can see. Doing it openly ruins your image. Instead, you operate in the shadows. You handle it in private conference rooms. You drop subtle hints and plant little seeds of doubt right into the ears of the executives cutting the checks. And the wildest part of this entire saga? The plan almost succeeded, because right around mid-February 2026, the gossip was absolutely out of control. Viewers were dead set on the idea that Perk was already out the door. Blogs were dropping articles left and right about his messy departure. While Stephen A. Smith, if you believe Perk, was just kicking his feet up, grinning while the whole disaster played out. The guy even seemed to be poking fun at him on live television after the firing rumors peaked, acting like someone's actual career was just primetime reality TV. But here is the one massive detail Stephen A. missed. He totally forgot that the network's official media hub still had Perk on the active roster for basketball coverage. He definitely wasn't expecting Perk to grab a spot on the totally overhauled NBA Countdown crew right next to Malika Andrews, Brian Windhorst, and Michael Malone. Most importantly, he never banked on the reality that those exact same higher-ups he had been secretly plotting with actually realized Kendrick Perkins brought real value to the table and decided to keep him around. He didn't make it because Stephen A. Smith helped him. He made it despite Smith trying to hold him back. Now, get ready for the craziest, most ironic part of this whole situation. While Smith was supposedly pulling strings in the background to get Perkins fired, Smith actually chose to walk away from NBA Countdown himself while haggling over his own contract. The guy literally went on record saying he had zero interest in doing the broadcast because his plate was already too full. Think about that for a second. The dude supposedly scheming to boot Perkins off the network ended up leaving the broadcast himself, leaving Perkins as the last man standing. You seriously could not script a better punchline. Yet, through all this absolute madness, Perkins' biggest flex wasn't that crazy soundbite everyone shared. It wasn't what he spilled on podcasts, it wasn't some fiery tweet, and it definitely wasn't him talking back on live television. The ultimate power move from Big Perk was simply refusing to be another tragic example on Stephen A's resume. Let's face it, the sports broadcasting industry is brutal. The history books are loaded with TV personalities and talking heads who got completely swallowed alive by the corporate machine. These are folks who ended up on the bad side of the wrong executive, pushed the envelope just a little too far, or actually had the guts to disagree with the biggest dog in the yard. And what usually happens? They vanish. They fall right off the map, quickly swapped out for the next loudmouth or retired athlete who's perfectly happy being a yes man for Stephen A. But Big Perk absolutely refused to play that game. He dug his heels in, he laid his truth out on the table, and dragged a massive, uncomfortable issue into the light that ESPN executives had been dodging for over a decade. We're talking about unchecked authority, blatant double standards, and the scary reality of letting a single media star hold so much leverage that they can literally end somebody's livelihood just by picking up the telephone. That exact same call that handed Perkins his $700,000 deal could have snatched it right back. And honestly, he admitted that was the most terrifying part of all this. It wasn't about the paycheck. It wasn't about getting kicked off national television either. It was the cold, hard wake-up call that his whole run at the network relied on a guy who was never genuinely looking out for him in the first place. Fast forward to today, and Kendrick is still rocking his analyst gig at ESPN. You can literally go check their official press site right now, and his profile is sitting right there. All those rumors about him getting the boot, totally fake. Even with all those troll accounts and clickbait articles trying their hardest to trick the internet. As for Stephen A., well, he's still running the show. He remains the top earner on the payroll, holding onto that crown as the main guy pulling the strings and dominating the sports conversation. However, the vibe is definitely completely different now, because the secret is officially out. The viewers see right through it. Anyone grabbing their morning coffee to watch First Take is now fully aware that the on-screen banter might be a complete lie compared to the backstage reality. That kind of public awareness is the one problem Stephen A. absolutely cannot scream over, debate his way around, or PR spin into oblivion. Big Perk didn't simply weather the storm of Smith's supposed hit job, he dragged the whole operation into the daylight. By doing that, he ripped the mask off an ugly truth that sports networks have spent decades trying to keep buried. It proves that the most ruthless matchups in sports broadcasting have nothing to do with what happens on the hardwood or inside a boxing ring. The real bloodbaths happen behind closed office doors, inside luxury corporate suites, and during quiet phone conversations where industry heavyweights casually destroy careers before their food even arrives. So, the next time you tune in and catch Perk and Stephen A. sitting at that desk, yelling at each other about LeBron James, the MVP debate, or the holiday game lineup, take a second and really ask yourself, are you watching a genuine debate or just another fake wrestling promo for a system that was totally rigged before they even hit the air? Trust me, Kendrick Perkins figured out that answer a long time ago, and thanks to him, now you have the answer too. Hey, if you like this deep dive, Make sure to browse the channel for more crazy sports media stories. Appreciate you hanging out with us, and catch you guys in the next upload.